The strongest soldier in 47 conquered star systems touched the wrong human woman. Nobody reached for a weapon. Nobody raised their voice. And somehow that made it infinitely worse. My name is Voruk. I am a mid-ranking soldier of the Cathali Empire, which, for those of you keeping score at home, has conquered 47 star systems, absorbed 16 civilizations, and once made an entire ocean-dwelling species surrender by simply showing up above their planet and honking. Yes, honking. We have a very large ship. The sound it makes is, by galactic consensus, deeply unpleasant. I tell you this not to brag. I tell you this because context matters. When you are about to watch someone make the single greatest strategic mistake in the 300-year history of the Cathali military, it helps to understand exactly how confident everyone involved was, right up until the moment everything went sideways. The Cathali, as a species, are impressive. We stand nearly 3 meters tall. We have 4 arms, 2 of which are purely for intimidation, and gray-green scaled skin that has been described by multiple conquered species as deeply troubling to look at for extended periods. Our eyes are gold and vertical slit, which, according to our own cultural historians, communicates power, intelligence, and a general air of authority. According to one human child on Helios 7, who I met several weeks later, our eyes look like a cat that is annoyed at you specifically. She was 6 years old. She said it without flinching. This should have been our first warning. High Command, in its infinite wisdom, decided that humanity needed to be evaluated. This is the word they used, evaluated. As if humans were a spreadsheet or a piece of software that needed testing before installation. Humanity had, at that point, managed to build 4 off-world research stations, establish contact with 3 spacefaring civilizations, and, apparently, invent 17 new varieties of fermented grain beverages. High Command found none of this particularly threatening. They found the beverages curious. They sent a delegation anyway. The delegation was led by Commander Draven Os. I was assigned to his unit as Secondary Liaison and General Observer, which is a title that means the person who writes down everything that goes wrong so that someone, somewhere, can learn from it. I have filled many reports over the years. I sensed, boarding the transport to Helios 7, that this particular assignment would require a longer document than usual. Helios 7 was humanity's first joint off-world research station. It orbited a modest star at a sensible distance, housed approximately 40 human researchers and engineers, and smelled, according to our atmospheric sensors, of recycled air, machine lubricant, and something sweet that we later identified as a substance humans consume in the morning before they are willing to speak to each other. I found this detail comforting. Even aliens, it seems, require a chemical buffer before social interaction. Commander Draven Ace, for his part, reviewed the station schematics, reviewed the human crew manifest, and declared the whole situation manageable. He said this with the particular confidence of someone who has never once in his long career been wrong about anything and simply assumes the universe is keeping score in his favor. He adjusted the medals on his chest, straightened his spine to its full and frankly unnecessary height, and prepared to make contact with humanity. I checked my recorder. I had extra memory chips. I had a feeling I was going to need them. The docking sequence with Helios 7 took approximately 14 minutes, which gave Commander Draven Os 14 full minutes to explain to the rest of us why humans were going to be very easy to deal with. He had clearly prepared this speech. He had notes. I do not know who he thought was going to stop him. Nobody did. We all stood there in our armor and listened to a grown Cathali warrior explain that humans were small, soft, and communicated primarily through something called smiling, which he described as a baring of teeth that inexplicably does not signal aggression. The airlock opened. The first human to greet us was a woman named Saoirse Chin. She was the station's lead xenobiological researcher, which, for context, means she spent her professional life studying alien organisms. She had, by the time we arrived, already catalogued 412 species of off-world microbes, written 2 books on non-carbon-based cellular structures, and apparently in her spare time learned to play a string instrument, built her own atmospheric filtration model from scratch, and kept a small cactus on her workstation named Gerald. Gerald, as far as I know, is still alive. He is a survivor. This makes sense. Sir Sachin looked at our delegation. 4 Cathali soldiers in full battle armor, gold eyes glowing, 4 arms each, standing at heights that required the station's ceiling sensors to recalibrate. She looked at Commander Draven Oss, who was making what he believed to be an authoritative expression. She looked at me, then she looked back at her console, made 2 notes, and said, "Docking confirmed. Welcome to Helios 7. Coffee is in the common room if you want it. We do not know if you can metabolize it safely, so maybe do not touch it without asking." Commander Draven Oss blinked. She had already turned back to her work. Now, I want to be precise about what happened in that room, because I have thought about it many times since, and I believe it is the moment that should have told us everything. When a species is afraid of you, they react. They step back, they become very loud, or very quiet, or they do that thing where they try to seem calm, but their hands do not agree with the rest of them. We had seen this across 47 star systems. Fear has a texture. You can feel it in a room. Sir Sachin was not afraid. She was not performing bravery either. She was simply, genuinely more interested in her data than in us. We were, to her, at that particular moment, a scheduling inconvenience. She had things to do. We were between her and doing them. Commander Draven Oss introduced himself. She acknowledged this. He listed his titles. She typed something. He gestured at our delegation with what I can only describe as a sweeping theatrical arm movement intended to communicate scale and importance. She glanced up, said and went back to her screen. Behind me, I heard Private Thos quietly say to Private Yennik, "Is she ignoring him?" Private Yennik replied, in an equally quiet voice, "I think she is doing her job." Commander Draven Oss, meanwhile, had decided that the lack of reaction was simply further evidence of human simplicity. They did not know to be impressed, he reasoned. They did not understand what they were looking at. We would need to demonstrate our superiority more clearly. He was already planning how to do this. I was already writing it down. Across the room, a large human engineer named Brecken Hollis was working on a coolant relay with a wrench roughly the size of my forearm. He glanced at us once, nodded in a way that communicated absolutely nothing threatening, and yet somehow felt like a full assessment, and went back to his coolant relay. His hands were the size of serving platters. He had a scar that ran along his jaw that he had apparently gotten not in combat, but in what the human crew described as a disagreement with a pressure valve. He had won. The pressure valve had not. I filed all of this. I filed it very carefully. Under things to remember. It happened on the 3rd day. I want to be clear that there were warning signs. There are always warning signs. The universe is not subtle. It puts up signs, large and blinking, that say, "Do not do this specific thing," and occasionally a smaller sign underneath that says, "We are serious, please stop, this is a bad idea," and then sometimes a 3rd sign that just says "fine" in a tone that implies it is not fine at all. Commander Draven Oss missed all 3 signs. He had spent 2 days observing the station crew and growing progressively more annoyed that they were not behaving the way conquered or soon-to-be-assessed species usually behave. Nobody flinched when he walked past. Nobody spoke to him with the particular trembling reverence that 47 conquered star systems had trained him to expect. The researchers asked him questions, scientific questions, about Cathali biology, atmospheric processing, navigational methods. They were, as far as he could tell, treating him like a research subject rather than a superior entity, and while he did not have the vocabulary to name this as the problem, it was clearly bothering him. On the morning of the 3rd day, Commander Draven Oss decided to reassert what he called the natural order of the interaction. I know this because he told me this specifically while reviewing his strategy over our morning meal. He said the words natural order. He said them with full confidence. I asked him what he planned to do. He said he planned to remind them of the power dynamic. I ate my meal. I said nothing. I had learned, over many years in the Cathali military, that when a superior officer uses the phrase, "remind them of the power dynamic," the most useful thing a secondary liaison can do is stay out of the immediate blast radius and document everything with the recorder set to its highest resolution. We were in the station's main research bay when it happened. Saoirse Chin was at her station working. Brecon Hollis was across the room with the coolant relay again. There were 5 other human crew members present, all doing various things that required their hands and their attention. It was, by all appearances, a normal morning on Helios 7. Commander Draven Oss walked up to Saoirse Chin's workstation. She did not look up. He said her name. She acknowledged this. He said, and I am quoting from my recorder because I believe exact words matter here, "You will find it useful to remember that you are speaking to a representative of the Cathali Empire, which has the military and technological capacity to reduce this station to its component atoms before your species finishes its morning beverage." Saoirse Chin looked up from her screen. She looked at him, she said calmly, "I am aware. Would you like to look at the data I compiled on your propulsion systems? I have some questions about your fuel efficiency ratios." This was not the response Commander Draven Oss had prepared for. He reached out and grabbed her by the wrist. The room went silent. I mean this in the most complete sense possible. The room went silent the way a room goes silent when something has crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed, when the air itself seems to hold a breath, when the temperature of the entire social environment drops several degrees simultaneously. It was not the silence of shock, it was the silence of recognition. Every human in that room recognized what had just happened. Commander Draven Oss did not. He was still talking, something about authority and cooperation and the terms of engagement, and I was watching his mouth move and hearing the words, but I was also watching the rest of the room, and what I saw in the rest of the room was the most quietly, efficiently terrifying thing I have ever witnessed in 47 star systems worth of travel. Brecon Hollis had put down his wrench. He had put it down carefully, deliberately. He was now standing with his full height, which was not as tall as us, but which somehow occupied the room differently than it had 30 seconds ago. He was not moving toward us. He was simply standing, facing our direction, in a way that suggested that the decision about whether or not to move had been made and was currently being held in reserve. The other 5 crew members had also, I noticed, stopped what they were doing. One of them, a younger woman with short hair named Priva Osei, had turned her chair to face us. She was not doing anything with her hands. They were resting on her knees. She was watching. That was it. Just watching. Nobody raised a voice. Nobody moved aggressively. Nobody drew a weapon. And somehow, that was so much worse. Saoirse Chin looked down at Commander Draven Oss's hand on her wrist. She looked at it the way someone looks at a spill on their workstation. Not with anger, not with fear, with the specific, measured expression of a person calculating the most efficient way to address an inconvenience. She looked down at the hand. Then she looked up at his face. Then she did something that I have replayed on my recorder approximately 400 times since, and that I still, genuinely cannot explain from a biomechanical standpoint. She broke his grip. This is simple to say. It is not simple to describe. She moved her wrist in a small, precise rotation that involved her entire forearm and a pivot I did not see coming, because it should not, by the basic geometry of the situation, have worked. Commander Draven Oss's grip was not casual. He had 4 arms. 2 of them are built purely for physical dominance. His grip strength, by Cathali military standards, is rated in the top 15% of his unit. And yet, in approximately 1.5 seconds, using what appeared to be a motion she had practiced often enough that it required no particular concentration, she was no longer being held and he was holding air. She straightened her sleeve. She said, in a voice that was the same volume and temperature as every other sentence she had spoken since our arrival, "If you touch me again, I will return the hand separately." Commander Draven Oss made the second worst decision of his career and laughed. This was a mistake, not because it angered her. She did not appear more angry. She appeared approximately the same amount of calibrated, precise attention that she had shown since the moment we arrived. The mistake was that the laugh was loud enough to fill the room and every human in the room heard it, and every human in the room's response to that laugh was the same response delivered in complete silence and complete stillness, which communicated something that I, after a long career of reading hostile species, understood with terrible clarity. They had decided. I do not know what they decided exactly in that specific moment, but it was the kind of decision that gets made all at once across an entire group without anyone speaking. Brecken Hollis did not pick the wrench back up. He took one step forward, just one. He stopped there. He was still not moving toward us aggressively. He was simply one step closer than he had been. Priva Osei had her hands off her knees now. They were hanging at her sides in a way that was technically neutral and yet communicated absolute readiness. The other 4 crew members had redistributed themselves across the room in a pattern that I, with some alarm, recognized as tactical positioning. They had not coordinated this out loud. They had not made eye contact with each other to signal it. They had simply, collectively, rearranged themselves in the exact configuration that would make any escalation by our side as complicated as possible. Commander Draven Oss was still talking. He was saying something about diplomatic consequences and Cathali military reach and the inadvisability of threatening a ranking officer. He was saying it to Saoirse Chin, who was listening with the expression of someone waiting for a sentence to finish so that the conversation can move on to something more productive. He was not, I noticed, reaching for her again. I stepped forward. This is the part of my career I am most proud of. I stepped in front of Commander Draven Oss, and I said, in a voice I worked very hard to keep level, I believe this would be an excellent time to contact High Command. Commander Draven Oss said he did not need to contact High Command. Saoirse Chin said, that is fine. I will wait. She sat back down. She went back to her screen. She began typing. Her hands were completely steady. I watched them. I watched them because I needed to understand something, and what I understood, watching those hands, was that she was not calming herself down. She had not been alarmed to begin with. She had simply dealt with the situation and was now returning to the work she had been doing before we interrupted her. I have fought in 3 military campaigns. I have stood in rooms with species twice our size with twice our weapons. I have been in situations that my training classified as high risk. None of them felt like this room felt in that moment. None of them had this specific texture. And I think, finally, I understood why. In every other dangerous situation I had been in, the danger was visible. You could point at it. You could measure it. This was something different. This was the danger of something that did not need to perform danger because it had already decided, quietly, completely, and without any particular drama, that it was fully prepared to be dangerous if the situation required it. And the situation, so far, had not required it. So they waited. Brecken Hollis waited, one step forward, hands at his sides. Priva Osei waited, chair turned, expression neutral. Saoirse Chin typed, and Commander Draven Oss, for the first time in his career, had nothing to say. High Command was not pleased to receive our communication. I know this because the response came in 37 minutes, which, by Cathali military communication standards, is essentially instantaneous, and instantaneous responses from High Command typically mean one of 2 things. Either something has gone so right that they want to celebrate it immediately, or something has gone so catastrophically wrong that they need to begin the process of pretending it was someone else's idea. The message was addressed to Commander Draven Oss. It was not long. I read it aloud because Commander Draven Oss, at that moment, had what I can only describe as the expression of a Cathali officer who has begun to suspect that the universe does not in fact keep score in his favor. The message said, in official High Command language that I will translate loosely, that Commander Draven Oss was effective immediately, relieved of field command pending review, that his command was being transferred to Senior Liaison Voruk, meaning me, that this decision had been made based on preliminary report data, and that High Command wished to extend its formal preliminary apologies to the Helios 7 station crew for any, and this is the word they used, interpersonal friction during the delegation's visit. I finished reading. The room was very quiet again. but it was a different kind of quiet this time. Commander Dravenos turned and walked to the back of the room. He stood there. He did not speak. He was, I think, processing, which is a generous way of saying that he was standing very still and staring at a wall while his understanding of his own career rearranged itself around him. I turned to Saoirse Chin. She was looking at me, not with triumph, not with satisfaction, with the same level, attentive expression she had worn since we arrived. She said, "So you are in charge now?" I said yes. She said, "Good. I have some thoughts about how we should proceed." I said that I was ready to hear them. She said that she wanted 3 things. The first thing she wanted was full access to the Cathali medical archives, specifically the sections relating to cellular regeneration and neural tissue repair, because her current research on non-carbon xenobiology had hit a wall that she believed Cathali data could help her scale. She said this the way someone orders food, like it was a reasonable request that she expected to be fulfilled. The second thing she wanted was a formal written apology from the Cathali High Council. Not from Commander Dravenos, from the Council, in writing, with official seal. She wanted it within 10 standard days. The third thing she wanted was a better coffee machine for the station's common room. The current one, she explained, was a model from 4 years ago, and it took 11 minutes to brew a full pot, which was, in her words, genuinely unacceptable. I looked at her. She looked at me. Somewhere behind me, I was aware that Brecken Hollis had not yet moved from his position 1 step forward from where he had been standing. I was aware of this the way you are aware of weather. You do not have to look at the sky to know it is there. I contacted High Command again. The conversation that followed lasted 2 hours. I will not reproduce it in full, partly because it is classified, and partly because the parts that are not classified are mostly just High Command making the specific kind of internal political calculations that senior military officials make when they need to give someone something without appearing to be giving it because they were asked. At various points, words like goodwill gesture and ongoing research partnership and proactive diplomatic investment were used. None of these words were, "We are doing this because we do not want Brecken Hollis to pick up that wrench." But that was, as far as I could determine, the operational reality. The Cathali Medical Archives access was approved in 40 minutes. The formal written apology took 6 days, which is 4 days faster than High Command has ever produced a formal written apology for anything in recorded history. The coffee machine was delivered personally by a Cathali supply courier 8 days later. It was the best available model. It brewed a full pot in 90 seconds. The courier left without making eye contact with anyone. Saoirse Chin thanked me when it arrived. She poured a cup. She offered me one. I said I did not know if I could metabolize it safely. She said, "Me neither the first time. I did not drink it. But I appreciated the offer, and I appreciated, more than I could explain in official language, that she said the first time and not try it anyway." I was beginning to understand, someone who had made an extensive professional habit of being exactly as helpful as the situation required, and not 1 syllable more. Commander Dravenos, for the record, was transferred off Helios 7 the following morning. He left without speaking to anyone. He took his medals. He left behind a strategic assessment that I read later, in private, and that described humanity as more complicated than anticipated. This was, all things considered, the understatement of my career. Word spreads in the Cathali military the same way it spreads in every military organization across the known galaxy. Not through official channels, not through formal reports, not through the careful documented communication systems that High Command spends considerable resources maintaining. It spreads the way actual information always spreads. Through the people who were there telling the people who were not, and through the people who were not telling the people who might be there next, and through the slow, accumulating weight of a story that gets repeated because something about it refuses to stay quiet. By the 2nd month of my assignment to Helios 7, I had received 17 requests from other Cathali officers, delegation members, and at least 2 researchers from the Cathali Imperial Science Division, all of whom wanted to visit the station. Not for research, not for diplomacy, not for any of the stated reasons included in their official communications. They wanted to see Saoirse Chin. I found this professionally fascinating and personally exhausting. They came in small groups, usually framed as cultural exchanges or data-sharing visits. They sat in the common room of Helios 7, drank the coffee that the new machine made in 90 seconds, and observed. Saoirse Chin continued to do her research. She answered their questions when she had time. She did not adjust her behavior for an audience. She did not perform anything for them. She simply worked, and occasionally looked up to acknowledge a question, and then went back to her screen. The observers went home and wrote reports. I read some of them. They described her using language that I found, given the events that had produced her reputation, quite funny. Words like anomalous behavioral profile and non-standard threat assessment indicators and consistently elevated situational awareness under evaluation conditions, all of which were technically accurate, and all of which were also, in plain language, just ways of saying she knows we are watching and she does not care, and the fact that she does not care is the most unsettling thing we have seen in 47 star systems. I, meanwhile, had been formally confirmed as the permanent liaison to Helios 7. I had not requested this. I had not been asked if I wanted it. I-Command had sent me a communication saying that my presence on the station was stabilizing, which in official Cathali diplomatic language means you have not made anything worse, and we are going to keep you there indefinitely in case you continue to not make anything worse. I made an arrangement with Saoirse Chin. I would not interfere with her work. She would not throw me out of the station. We settled on this terms quickly, which is to say that I proposed them, and she said sure without looking up, which I chose to interpret as agreement. It was, by any objective measure, a professional arrangement and nothing more. And yet, over the following weeks, several things happened that complicated this classification. She started leaving a second cup of coffee on her workstation at approximately the same time every morning. She did not say this cup was for me. She did not look up when I sat down near it, but it was there. And it was the right size for my hands, which are larger than human hands, and she had noticed this at some point without commenting on it. I drank it. I did not comment either. This seemed correct. She taught me to play a human card game called Shad, which is a betting game that involves cards with numbers and what humans call suits, which are little symbols that mean nothing to me on a biological level, and apparently mean very little to the game either, except when they don't, which is most of the time. The rules as presented to me were straightforward. The rules, as applied by Saoirse Chin, were not the rules she had presented to me. I do not have evidence of this. I have only the consistent experience of losing, and the consistent experience of her expression remaining perfectly neutral when she won, which is not the expression of someone who is winning because of the cards. I taught her 3 Cathali insults. The first one translates roughly as, your navigation calculations are as reliable as a broken star map, and is the standard Cathali military insult for someone who cannot be trusted with direction. The second is, your scales have the luster of a discharged power cell, which is an aesthetic insult with no practical military application, but which I included because it is one of my favorites. The third one does not translate. Not because the concept does not exist in human language, but because the insult requires knowing how long a Cathali soldier typically spends polishing their secondary arms, and without that context, it loses its venom entirely. She learned the pronunciation of all 3 in one sitting. She used the third one on Commander Thavos of the 4th Delegation, who arrived unannounced 6 weeks into my assignment, clicked his secondary arms at her in what he believed was an intimidating fashion, and then heard a human say something in Cathali that made the 2 soldiers behind him take an involuntary step back. Commander Thavos asked me later what she had said. I told him it was a cultural exchange. He did not believe me. He left the station 2 days early. I am not saying I enjoyed this. I am saying I recorded it very thoroughly. It was a junior soldier who made the mistake. His name was Keth Arovas. He was 22, which is young for a Cathali soldier and very young for a catastrophic social error. He had arrived with a resupply team, which meant he had not been briefed on the full situation at Helios 7, which meant he had not heard the story, which meant he had not been given the specific and non-negotiable piece of advice that every Cathali officer who had been to Helios 7 gave to every Cathali officer who had not. The advice was simple. The advice was, be polite, do not touch anything without asking, do not make assumptions, and if Saoirse Chin is working, do not interrupt her unless you are prepared to be looked at. Keth Arovis had not received this advice. He was moving equipment through the main corridor. Saoirse Chin was coming the other way with a data pad and a cup of coffee from the new machine. They met at the corridor junction. He had a large crate. She had the right-of-way, which in the Cathali resupply protocols is theoretically calculated by cargo priority, but which in Helios 7 corridor norms is calculated by whoever is a station resident, and which in practical terms on that particular morning was clearly Saoirse Chin. Keth Arovis said, "And I have this on my recorder because I had it running, as I always did on the station. Move! Cargo transport in progress." He said it the way young soldiers say things, loud, confident. Not because he had assessed the situation fully, but because he had not assessed it at all and confidence was filling the gap. Saoirse Chin stopped walking. She looked at him. She said, "Excuse me?" 2 words. That was the entirety of her response. 2 words, delivered in a tone that was not angry, not threatening, not even particularly cold. It was the tone of someone who has asked a question and is genuinely waiting to see how the next few seconds are going to go, and whose patience for the next few seconds, while not absent, is not infinite either. I was at the far end of the corridor. I saw the whole thing. What I saw was this. Every human crew member in or near that corridor simultaneously became very still, not because they had signaled each other, not because anyone had said anything. They became still the way a group of creatures becomes still when a sound reaches them all at the same time, and none of them need to ask what the sound means. Priva Osei appeared in a doorway to my left. Brecken Hollis materialized from somewhere down the right branch of the junction. I do not know where he had come from. He was simply there, as he always seemed to be when the corridor's particular social pressure began to rise, large and quiet and holding nothing, because he did not need to hold anything. Keth Arovis had the specific dawning expression of someone who has just realized they have stepped into something they did not see, and that they cannot see the bottom of, and that it is very quiet down there. He said, "I apologize, ma'am." The last word came out in a way that suggested it surprised him too. He had not planned it. It simply emerged the way things emerge when a situation requires them, and the body, being sensible, does not wait for the brain to schedule a meeting about it. Saoirse Chin nodded once. She walked past him. She continued down the corridor. She did not look back. Keth Arovis stood there for a moment. He looked at Brecken Hollis. Brecken Hollis looked at him. Then Brecken Hollis turned and walked back the way he had come, and the doorway where Priva Osei had appeared was empty again, and the corridor was just a corridor. I went and found Keth Arovis later that evening. He was in the resupply staging area, very carefully not making eye contact with anyone. I asked him how he was finding the station. He said it was fine. I asked him if he had any questions. He thought about this. Then he said, "Who is she?" I told him she was the lead xenobiological researcher. He thought about this more. Then he said, "Is she always like that?" I said yes. He nodded slowly. He said, "Okay." He said it like someone accepting a fact of nature, like someone being told the temperature of a star, or the rate of expansion of a particular gas, or any other measurement that cannot be negotiated with and simply has to be worked into your calculations going forward. I went back to my station. The next morning, Thavos's former aide, who was still on board finishing paperwork, referred to Saoirse Chin in a communication as "Ma'am Chin," without any apparent awareness that this was unusual. I noticed it. I did not mention it. The morning after that, 2 of the resupply soldiers used the same address. Then the science exchange officer from the 3rd Diplomatic Unit, who had been on Helios 7 for 3 weeks and had barely spoken to her directly, sent a data request to her terminal that began, "If ma'am is available, we had a question about the filtration schedule." No one had made a rule. No one had issued an order. No one had sat down and decided. It had simply become true the way a great many true things become true through the quiet accumulation of encounters and assessments, and the collective, wordless conclusion of many different individuals who all, independently, arrived at the same place. She was ma'am. This was not discussed. It did not need to be. I filed my official report to Cathali High Command on the 417th day of my assignment to Helios 7. The report was long. I will share the summary. I described humanity as a species that is, by conventional Cathali military metrics, structurally inefficient. Their biology requires excessive caloric input, multiple hours of unconsciousness every cycle, and a continuous supply of a hot liquid beverage, without which their communication skills decline noticeably. Their star technology, while functional, is not as fast as ours. Their weapons, while inventive, are not as powerful as ours. Their population, while large, is not as organized as ours. They have no centralized high command. They negotiate by committee. They make decisions through a process called voting that, as far as I can determine, is exactly as slow and contentious as it sounds. By every standard measure, they should not be as difficult to deal with as they are. And yet, I described their greatest tactical asset in the report as something I struggled to put in official language. It is not a weapon. It is not a technology. It is not a strategy, in the conventional sense. It is a combination of things that, separately, are unremarkable, but that together produce something I have not encountered in 47 star systems. They are unpredictable without being chaotic. They are quiet at exactly the moments when quiet is most frightening. They communicate the most serious information through the most casual possible delivery, and they do not, as best I can observe, distinguish in any meaningful way between I am at peace and I am prepared for something that is not peace. The transition is invisible. The capacity is always present. I recommended, formally and in writing, that no Cathali soldier should make uninvited physical contact with a human crew member at any station, diplomatic vessel, or shared facility without first submitting the relevant paperwork through the Diplomatic Interaction Registration Office, waiting a minimum of 3 standard days, and genuinely reconsidering. I used the word genuinely. I meant it. I recommended that all incoming Cathali personnel assigned to joint stations receive a briefing on human nonverbal communication, specifically the difference between a human who is comfortable and a human who is about to solve a problem, because these look almost identical from the outside, and the difference matters enormously once you are inside the situation. I concluded the report with my overall assessment of the human species. I wrote, dangerously unpredictable, deeply unsettling in moments of calm, and considerably more organized than their organizational structures suggest they should be. They communicate the most information with the least language. They extend goodwill readily and withdraw it precisely. They keep small plants at their workstations and give them names. I do not know what to do with this last observation, but I have included it in case it is relevant to someone else. I submitted the report. Then I went to the card table in the Helios 7 common room. Sursa Chin was already there. The coffee machine was running. Gerald the cactus was on the windowsill doing whatever cacti do when no one is watching them, which appears to be the same thing Gerald does when someone is watching, which is nothing visible and yet somehow, undeniably, growing. She dealt the cards. I lost in 11 moves. I do not understand how she does it. I have memorized the rules. I have run statistical probability models on the card distribution. I have considered and rejected the hypothesis that the deck is configured to disadvantage me specifically because I have watched her shuffle it and there is nothing irregular in the sequence. And yet, every time, in 11 to 14 moves, the cards in front of me arrange themselves into a losing position that I did not see arriving. She is cheating. I do not have evidence of this. I do not say it out loud. I pick up my cards for the next round, I adjust my recorder, and I think, not for the first time, that I have been in 47 star systems and I have never once encountered something I could not, eventually, find a category for. I think Sursa Chin might be the first. Gerald the cactus does not comment. I deal the next hand.